If a person's talking about something vulnerable, it's really important to just really listen.
The aphrodisiac chai, as you said, and then this is combined with cards, with questions.
How do you keep that spark alive?
What would be a good way for us to initiate sex? Can we create a ritual?
Love is in the eye of the beholder. There's just so much more to life than what I knew. I mean, an athlete, an entrepreneur.
Tell me what death is. Tell me what death is not.
If there's a potential to be this way with this experience, then let's choose that. Once I tried that, within 6 months, the business was making $10,000 a month. Within 18 months, it was making $40,000 a month. If you run out the back door, I'll just keep chasing you, for the hour, and you'll get your workout in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Many Firsts, the podcast where we explore the power of first-time experiences and share transformative and inspirational moments in our lives. I'm your host, Regula Fischer, and I'm super happy to be here today live with Dan Mezheritsky. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I usually like to say, how has your day been so far? But in your case, I probably say, how has your trip been so far? Because we're actually using the opportunity of a stopover that you have, right? To meet and talk about a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for making it happen, because this is a stopover for you.
Yes, exactly. Stopovers let's use the opportunity, right? And you brought, even though it's on a trip that you are, on a travel trip in that sense, you brought some surprises that make me really happy and that I want to explore with you in the conversation. But let me briefly also explain why these
Absolutely.
gifts.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Canada and your first professional career was as a decathlete.
Yes.
And you represented Canada in many international events until, unfortunately, I would say, but at that point, probably yes, an injury cut your sports career short.
Yes.
But you stayed in the field of sport and created your own company and a fitness company nationwide in Canada. You eventually exited that company successfully and then started exploring the world and traveled and have been living a nomadic lifestyle for over a decade, I think now. And a learning that you got from that lifestyle was that relationships are really one of the most important things in life. And that then led to the foundation of your newest company, Sacral Chai. And I do think, if I'm not mistaken, that the launch of Sacral Chai was 1 year ago, more or less, exactly, I think. So it's a bit like anniversary or birthday celebration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feels very special. And we have some Sacral Chai here. I mean, really makes me happy this morning to spend that over a cup of chai.
My pleasure,
the name says.
Yeah.
It is chai, so it's a tea. But I think I would like to let you explain and talk about the Sacral Chai journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly what you said. I think after 10 years of traveling and my first business being in fitness, I still do think that the most important thing in our life is our health. And so I've definitely. I can say I've learned health, and I think I don't want to say mastered it, but I know it well, and that's part of my lifestyle. So it's the next part of what's most important, I think, in life are relationships, and obviously it's relationship with yourself, relationship with others, and for me, I'm. Well, right now I'm seeing someone, but I still have not been married. I was just listening to a podcast about this, divorce lawyer, and talking about all these, statistics and so on, and I think that's kind of what I've created here is just how to keep the spark in relationships going, and I obviously have gone through heartbreak. I've failed in relationships, and I understand that where when we take somebody for granted, that's the biggest problem, and so how do you keep that spark alive for years to come? And I think that the most important thing is just devoting time to that person. And so that's where, obviously having a physiological change with having, amazing aphrodisiacs in a chai can help induce that. But I wanted to go much further because it's not just about a physiological change, take this pill and then it's going to make you want this person. We are body, mind, spirit, and so that's where by connecting the questions that we have and what we've created is this 90-day protocol, so having the just 15 minutes a day sitting down with your partner, discussing one question over a cup of chai, it's going to put life into your relationship. And a lot of these questions, I know that even some of my friends that have been married for 10 years, 15 years that I've now sent this to, they're like, wow, I've never even asked my wife this question. And so that's where when you lead with vulnerability, it really exposes your heart. And that's where, when that happens, that true connection can be much more solid. And so that's really what I've created.
I see. So it's a combination of that's the box of the chai, right? The aphrodisiac chai, as you said. And then there's this is combined with cards with questions, and there's 3 stacks in that sense. One that says connect, one that says bond, and one that says unite.
Yes.
And here, for example, that's the connect one. Questions like, how would you describe me to a stranger? What is the one thing you've never told me because you were afraid of my reaction? Yeah, very deep. Who came up with these questions?
So it's a combination. I definitely did my research with all the different card games, therapists, and then, to be honest, it was actually one of my friends who went through a shamanic journey with his wife. That they sent me their questions, and I was like, "Wow, this is amazing!" And so, we got the blessing to use some of those, and that's very much in the month 2, the bond.
The bond.
So connect is, as you just read, but as you see in bond, it's much more the definitions, because it's an interesting thing that when a person says a word, you don't really understand how they understand that word and how they define it. And so that's where the first 15 days is really like, you can see what is that word in front.
Tell me what death is. Tell me what death is not.
Right. And tell me what
connection is.
And tell me what connection is not. So
God.
Yeah. So really understanding your partner's definitions of these crucial words, I think, is a very important practice. And then the 3rd month, and that's why it's in sequential order, is discussions discussions about sex, different rituals for sex. And so again, in line with obviously what the aphrodisiac is for, and this is to really connect in a deeper way, because I find that realistically most people, they're, especially as I was just listening to this podcast, as timely as it was, they don't talk about their preferences in the bedroom. It's almost, they're scared of the judgment. But the reality is that that's a big part of a relationship. And if it's not addressed, then it's not going to be fixed.
Yeah.
And so this might just give people a little bit of that extra help to have a discussion that they really wanted to, and also different ideas of how to create a better container, as opposed to just hey, roll over, or the kids are asleep, So
routines in that sense, or automated maybe behavior that has come in. So bring in some life and some creativity, probably curiosity. What I have here is, what would be a good way for us to initiate sex? Can we create a ritual? So I just thought I'd read that out, because ritual is in there. And you also mentioned spending 15 minutes, I think what you said, a day over a cup of chai. and the question, right? So the combination of that, has that been, you have experimented with this, I guess. I mean, in terms of the success, what do you know about the success that this has? I mean, it sounds a bit commercial success, but what feedback have you gotten from
from
Sacral Chai?
So far, people love the chai. They love the feeling. I mean, I think you've even said that your heart rate has dropped. I mean, there's 6 aphrodisiacs in it, active ingredients.
They sound like a song, I think. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
The active ingredients, they're primarily vasodilators, which is they increase the size of your veins, not an extreme amount, but enough to help with blood flow. There's muscle relaxant and also anti-anxiety, and so it's a very it chills you down. It's not a coffee. So from the physiological standpoint, people really enjoy the effects of it. Yeah. It's not something that will, if you drink it once, it's not going to be immediate. Although, we had some very interesting feedback at A-Fest. But in terms of, it's a supplement. So if you have a daily, after about 7 to 10 days is when the effects are really, come into the body. These questions, we are just, this is now year 1. We just got the cards ready. So we did have questions online, and that's where I don't know how many people actually use them, to be honest, So because it was just an email every day, and the one thing that I'm going to, the trial and error that we're going to see with this. I don't know about you, if you've ever played these card games before, and why I was a little bit hesitant to start with this is because as soon as I get the card game, I just look through every single question. I don't like this one. I like this one. I don't like this one. And so that's where, this is where the difference with this is it's definitely, it's more of a program. And so, you if somebody picks up day, 64, it's not going to be effective. So going through each of the days one by one, and that's why they're labeled this way. So that's where I can't tell you that I have any feedback. I have feedback from friends and that have proofread the questions, and they like it and they're excited for it. But this is new.
I'm so curious to see what it will bring to people. Personally, I really love that. What I think is, to get a question can be so helpful, because sometimes it's that, inside of me, it's often that maybe the questions are there, but I don't even dare to look at them enough. I kind of try to ignore them.
Right.
So if the question is there, that's the first step. But then answering it, what is your personal experience? Again, it sounds like measuring, but how good are you with these questions? And finding the answer, because it's about finding words, right?
And I think that it's actually more important as the listener to allow for the person to answer, and that's where I find that keeping the attention on the other person, and we kind of even say in the instructions, don't try to relate. Because if a person's talking about something vulnerable, then, and so it's our natural instinct to be like, oh my God, me too. And then you kind of hijack the conversation. Right. Yeah. And so then the person is like, well, hold on, I just told you something that was very difficult, and maybe it's not difficult for you, and you're trying to make the person feel better too. But it's really important to just really listen and give that person the time and space to elaborate what it is that they're feeling, and let them know that it's okay, and hearing it from a place of non-judgment. It really will make it much easier. And then once that person is done, it's even better. I have that too. And then it'll make the person feel even better. So that's where I think that the listening is really important, because if a person comes back with a huge judgment, then I can tell you that the next question that they're going to be answering, it may not come so naturally and freely for them.
True.
So I think it's really important for us to just listen to our partners.
And probably gain a new level of trust also through that, right?
Of course, and that's why if you're listening through curiosity, then of course now you're now more interested in this person. You're learning something new. When there's a judgment, it's kind of pushing a person away. At least it'll feel that way to them.
Yeah. It's nice. So listening basically as a very important part of having a conversation, right? It's not just the talking, it's the listening or just sitting.
Right.
So you're saying these 15 minutes or so that we often do not have the time to take or take the time to take.
I think we have the time.
But it's very, very interesting, right? I would assume that in today's world, or let's maybe say the Western world and lifestyle, that it's exactly often that we wouldn't take the time. And a ritual like this would probably help to really make us aware. Now is the time to sit and talk. And the learning, I mean, where this came from, I think I read somewhere that it was inspired by your nomadic lifestyle and the importance of relationships that you learned through that lifestyle. So I would imagine that it is probably even more challenging to maintain deep connections when you travel a lot, or how is that?
Yeah, and I definitely didn't. You're right. It is difficult. But where the inspiration, the story of how it was truly created. I did have a partner. We dated for just over a year, and I don't drink coffee, so I love chai, and we're both health nuts. So she would always add little things to the chai of whatever, maybe some extra turmeric and some supplements. And I love plants and understanding how they work within our bodies. And so there was this one aphrodisiac that I did some research, and when I bought it, I'm like, I tried it. I had about 20 grams of it, which is 20 times the amount per serving here, and she had a lot as well. And there's no psychoactive effects of it, but after we had sex, I told her I felt like I was a tree growing through her, and she felt like roots going into the ground. Wow. And I was like, okay, wow, this thing works. And it also tasted like nutmeg. And I was like, this would actually kind of be a really good base for a chai. And so then as I started doing more research, I spoke with different biochemists and food scientists, then we kind of started getting the proper formulation. But really, her inspiration, our relationship was really the inspiration. And that's where also what I definitely learned from that relationship is how important ritual is. And I think having something that you and your partner just do daily, even if it's a really simple thing that takes less than 5 seconds, but I think that really strengthens a bond.
Yeah, there's something very spiritual in rituals, I feel.
Sure.
And sacral, of course, alludes to sacredness. So I think this is all kind of probably, I would say, also in the spiritual kind of area, right? And I think there's also something you said that this chai is about physical and emotional heart health, which I think is a very beautiful way of saying it. And I see here that there's something like a tree. You mentioned the tree.
Exactly. That's where the branding came from. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So it helps us grow our heart connections.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that if anyone has had very connected lovemaking, there's something sacred about it. It becomes very meditative, and it's kind of bringing you closer to that realm. So I think that's what a lot of this is guiding people to.
Yeah, different and like a different level of consciousness or
right.
An experience. So we were talking about rituals and health, and you said like health. I mean, it is the number one priority, I would believe, for most, if not all people. But where did you discover, or how, I mean, health also with sports, right? And athleticism, of course, it has a whole different importance, I would imagine, than maybe someone else who's not so much into sports. But where did that journey start for you? The focus on.
Well, I mean, it just was from being an athlete, and I was from 5 years old. My mom put me into gymnastics, so I was competing and doing backflips, and that was my life. And so I think gymnastics is a great base for all sports as a kid, and then I excelled in track and field. But I think health, it's pretty simple to understand, right? Like, I think what's the proverb? It's like, a healthy man wants 1,000 things, and a sick man wants one.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where we understand, right? Like, if our health is taken away, we can't do anything. And this is I don't know if this is true or not. I read somewhere that divorced people will live 4 years less than people that have not been divorced. So all of the things that we are doing for longevity, it seems like that's a pretty important one to have a happy marriage and happy relationship. So that's where, obviously we can drink whatever we drink for health, but if we don't also address our heart health, our emotional health, and that's where the relationships, and that's I think it kind of ties into our health. Because if our mental health and our emotional health is not there as well, that's not fun.
And I think especially in today's world, I think there's a lot of kind of research also around the loneliness, right? People getting more and more lonely. Then there's a lot of technology that seems to be taking over. So it is very important to create a balance, which helps us connect from the heart and for the heart.
Exactly.
And then there's entrepreneurship in this as well, right? So from sports, I don't know if you would have considered yourself as an athlete also a bit of an entrepreneur, or was that
for sure
a big transition? Or
I mean, I started my company, I was, I believe, 20. So I tore my hamstring, then I took, I think, 4 months of not knowing what my life was going to be like. I bartended in Vancouver for a summer, and then I just had this idea. When I worked in a gym for a couple of months, and I saw that even though people had a personal training session booked, they wouldn't show up. And so then I thought, well, if I come to your house, then you don't have an option. My joke was that if you run out the back door, I'll just keep chasing you, for the hour, and you'll get your workout in. And so that's how that business was born, of trainers going to people's homes, and then it evolved obviously to being a licensing system and franchise system that I built across Canada.
And how was that for you? I mean, how smooth of a journey or a ride, and what happened if there were maybe what we tend to call setbacks or so? What is how do you build resilience? Could maybe also have been influenced already by your mindset from sports and so on?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that is a first. It's a first business venture that I jumped in, and I think I'm thinking back now of it. My parents, they were supportive, but I think that they also, I was 20 years old, and they're thinking, well, maybe finish university first. And because I decided, I said, look, if the business goes in 1 year, then great. If it doesn't, then I'll go back to university. And so, whether you want to call it resilience, or if you want to call, strong-headedness, or stubbornness, it was failing for 8 years. I'd say 7 years. Yeah. I didn't know what I was doing. Did not know what I was doing. I mean, by 24, I had 50 employees. I was just I didn't know how to hire properly. I didn't know how to train properly the employees. I didn't know, how to spend money on marketing. I mean, I made 100,000 my first year in business, but I spent 100,000 on marketing over 6 weeks. And then for a Christmas push. And so the business kept on getting bigger numbers, but my bank account was not really doing anything. So, it definitely took, a lot of just doing the same thing. Once you realize the same thing does not work, changing it. And so I changed the business model 3 times before I actually found a solution that worked. And even at certain times, I took 6 months away from the business to really, because I understood that I was just so close to it that I can't see, I don't understand what's actually happening. And so, to really take myself away. Yeah. And then, I remember I was 27 and something clicked and I was like, oh, I'm just going to try it this way. And once I tried that, within 6 months, the business was, making 10,000 a month. Within 18 months, it was making 40,000 a month. And so then it just,
that was
blossomed.
after the zoom out, after you took some distance. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, the zoom out of where you were based in Canada, I think mainly, and the between the US and Canada, I think when you started traveling the world, you zoomed out even more.
Well,
so
that's a big zoom out. a 10 years zoom out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and maybe what does home mean to you in that sense? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I let's say zoomed out at 31.
Zoom.
Yeah.
And sounds a bit like
a car commercial. But so yeah, then that's when I started. I think that what is the question? What?
In terms of, I mean, home is probably a question I would have for you. What's the meaning of home for you? Probably, I guess you have left home soon, young already as an athlete also, right? But then also, why did you leave and go explore the world? Was that a conscious decision, or did you just start somewhere and then it took 10 years?
No, I think that, the reality is once the business, it was very exciting for me as an entrepreneur. It's beautiful to see an idea come to life and then, expand. And so it's like, I'm sure like a baby watching it, crawl, watching it, stand up, walk, run. And then for me, once I know that it's good, it kind of lost its interest for me.
Understand.
And because then it becomes extremely repetitive.
Yeah.
I'm not really, an operations person. I like to, think of an idea and bring it to life. And so that's where, I think that the monotony started to sink in of what needed to happen for the business to continue. And to be honest, I came from being an athlete till 20, then to an entrepreneur. And at 30 years old, I started getting this question in my head of who would I be if I was just, nobody, if I was just some guy.
Yeah.
And so obviously I couldn't step away from being a son. I couldn't step away from being a brother. But I could step away from being all the other ties that I had. And so, maybe that's a midlife crisis. Maybe it's, some awakening, but that's really what spurred that journey. And I just wanted to, go. And I think that's why my first trip was to Tokyo, because not many people speak English, and nobody knows me there, and I couldn't even communicate with people. And so then, if I didn't know that I would be on 600 flights over the next, 9-10 years, but it just, continued to roll. And I obviously enjoyed it. Now, obviously I'm slowing down and I'm building roots, but I think that's what really motivated me to explore.
I understand. So it wasn't a conscious decision to go for a decade. It just happened naturally.
No. I just wanted to, like I said, experience that. But what I understood is that there's just so much more to life than what I knew. I mean, an athlete, an entrepreneur, you're you have one vision on your mind. And so to be a little bit more free and to not live in a routine, to not live with any goal, I wanted to understand what that's like. Obviously, my old conditioning, I would still find goals in whatever it is that I'm doing. But and it's nice to kind of have had that, because I've explored so many parts of life that I didn't know existed, so many parts of myself. And that's where, I'm very happy that I was able to do this in my 30s, because, as how a lot of people, I think, wait until they're, 50, 60, 70 to go and explore. I think that by that time, your eyes, your filter of how you see this world is pretty set. But in your 30s, it's still able to, change a little easier, I think. And so that's where, I'm very happy that my filter has changed to see the world that I see now for the rest of my life.
Well, can you describe the difference between before and?
Well, I mean, I would say that, let's say, the amount of judgment has definitely changed, because, again, I was in such a small world that, anything outside of that world is different, is bad, or, is just not for me. Where, now because I've, explored and have an open mind for whatever it is that is out there, and I've learned that it's not scary, or if something is different, it's actually to be celebrated, and to to learn from absolutely everyone on this planet. So that's where I think I'm sure that there's more differences, but from a quick overview, I think that's.
Otherwise, we as we said, we should talk at the next stopover. We do another one. But I mean, of course, I totally relate to what you're saying about celebrating these challenges or difficulties, right? Because this is exactly with many firsts. Also, the first step is usually not the easiest, takes a lot of courage, or we're not proficient yet in what we do because it's the first step. But then at least we learn that it's not so scary, and we also understand if we want to continue on that. And it starts pulling us forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, once when we do something new that's different, it's a first time we feel like it's so challenging. It's dark, right? And we're so afraid of what's to happen. But the reality is, like, have you done something for a first time before and it's been all right? Yes. And so that's where it's just kind of reshaping that. No, it's great. And I think that, that's there were so many new experiences, traveling. Like I didn't know that there were even, like, let's say, a music festival. Like, I didn't know that existed. So then to go and be like, oh wow, like this is, people do this, and then you find out about people have been doing, like, they do this like many times a year. for you've been doing this for 20 years. Oh wow, right? And that's okay. That's the way you've chosen to live life. And then you meet somebody in some bar in let's say Copenhagen, and you find out that this person's been making apple cider, and this is their life, and then understanding just how everyone has their view, but it's also wonderful, and you can learn a little bit about how they've decided to live their life and what their priorities are, what they're focused on. And that's where the reality is that you start to understand most people have very similar priorities.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that comes to my mind, right? That in the end, and then we find out that most people want is just live a happy, peaceful life and stay healthy.
Yeah.
And also it sounds to me like you practiced your listening and observation a lot during those years, probably just soaking up what all the world had to offer.
Yeah.
And also confidence building, I would assume, in yourself.
I would think so. I think, well, there's that a story of my first. This was a very interesting story because it wasn't. It wasn't what I expected.
Can we hear it?
So I remember I was in Tokyo. This is, I think, a second or third time after my first trip there. And there's this amazing. It's called unagi. It's like this eel, and so it's just this restaurant, the little bar that grills eel. And so I get to the restaurant, and there's like 12 seats, and in the corner there's this older, Japanese guy, like maybe 70, 75, and he's just, he's staring at me, and then he starts laughing, and he's got this pint of beer, and so I can tell he's like, a little bit drunk, and he starts, saying things, and a little louder towards me, and I'm like, I don't know why, like there's a seat in front of me, I'm about to sit down. And then I see people, around him, kind of like gesturing to him, like to stop. And so I'm like, oh, this guy's being rude to me, and so, and then I did know, a word, gaijin. Gaijin means foreigner, but it's kind of like, not the most polite way.
Yeah.
And so then I heard that coming out of his mouth, and so I'm like, oh, okay, this is racism, and I've never experienced racism before, and so now, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna send this guy a shot of whiskey, and my intention was actually not a good one. My intention was because I was like, this way he'll be a little bit more hungover. So it truly, like, I wish that I can say that I came from, a good heart, but that was the intention. And so I sit down and I order my eel, I order a beer, and then he gets his shot of whiskey. And as soon as, the bartender kind of notes that I sent him this whiskey, he takes it and then he looks at me, and then all of a sudden his demeanor changes towards me. And he, I guess, saw this as a peace offering. And so I lift up, and so, we kind of acknowledge each other. And, he took this shot, and what that taught me is that love is in the eye of the beholder.
Wow.
Right? He saw it as this was a kind gesture.
Yeah.
And because he saw it this way, he disarmed me too. I was kind of like, I hope he's not going to be as hungover. I hope he really enjoyed it. and so all of a sudden, it changed my perception. So that's where, that was a very interesting lesson to learn, or an interesting way to learn it too.
Thank you for sharing that. And you seem to be a guy that brings beverages to people. But the intention here was a good one. I think I will not be hungover from this.
Now the intention is always love.
Yeah, we learned the lesson, right? There's another thing. Speaking of firsts, I think there was another kind of powerful first for you when you went on your first.
Yeah, my first flight.
Yeah,
which
so minus 600.
Minus 600, maybe minus 800. So this is I don't know exactly how old I was. I think I was about 4 or 5. And I remember, there's some people that they have a flight at 9 a.m. They're up at 4.
Yes.
and they're just, we got to get to the airport, no, and they get there 3.5 hours before the check-in counter isn't even open yet, and they're waiting and first in line, and even though it's it's happened many times, they still act this way. Well, for some reason, that's how I was at 4.
You're not like that, obviously, today because
No,
your flight
yeah,
leaves in an hour. But
I've nailed the traveling. I'm good with 27 minutes is good. But I was like that when I was 4 years old. For some reason, I just had this like anxiety that like we're gonna miss this flight, and it's the most important thing in the world, and we need to be there on time. And we now we're at the airport. We've checked our luggage, and now we're walking, to the gate. And I'm like, we've got to get to the gate. Like, my whole family, like and especially my dad is like walking slower than usual. And I'm looking at him like, like why are you walking like, I'm like, we got to get there. And my dad just looks at me and he's like, the flight won't leave without us. And he said it in such a calm way that I was like, okay, I think I want to be calm too. So I'm going to just, listen to him. And that lesson, I understood that two people or many people can have the exact same experience, but act differently. And I think I was very lucky to learn that at that young age.
Yeah.
But, that's where I just understood, okay, well, if there's a potential to be this way with this experience, then let's choose that. And I think, again, just because of my dad's, calmness, confidence, and trust in his words, it really sunk into me that it's like, this is an option that I could choose as well.
Very beautiful and interesting at that age that you felt probably worried also a bit about, once you understood that someone is waiting, right? Really,
Right.
I can trust that they will not just leave without me.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that as well.
Yeah.
Now, these were past first times. If we look into the future to close this beautiful conversation, what is the first time that you would like to create? We're also moving into a new year. Maybe marriage.
Yeah, marriage is after listening to this podcast, he's I'll have to send it to you.
Yeah, please.
Marriage, but more so, I really want my person. Let's put it that way, and I want a relationship, and I want a family. So obviously, it doesn't have to be this next year to have a family, but I'm ready for it, and so that's where that would be an amazing first to have a first child. So right now cultivating a beautiful relationship. That's not a first, and there are some experiences that I've even I've wanted to do, but I've set aside to make it be a first time with my partner.
I see.
Yeah. So those some of those trip ideas that I've had. So we'll see. Maybe I'll be taking some of those first
delayed
trips.
gratification, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I think it's also it's really cool that I've been to a lot of places. One of my really good friends, he's been to every single country in the world.
Wow.
And so
okay.
you can imagine, but there's so many different ideas of what you can do, but still, if he's going to take his now wife, he can show the world, and he's been there. And I think that's a really cool thing. And I've seen a lot of the world, and I can do that too. But having a first with someone, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
So that's then what I wish you from the bottom of my heart, that you will be getting this first time experience of deep connection and exploration. Thank you so much for being here today, for stopping over, having chai with us. And all the best, much love.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone. If you liked today's episode, it would mean the world to us if you like it and share it with anyone that can need a boost in courage. We would also like to hear from you. What are your reflections on this conversation? What are your ambitions, your passions, your dreams, your goals? Let's keep creating healthy, meaningful firsts together and keep creating these deep, meaningful relationships. Thanks. See you next first time. Until then, much love and courage. Ciao.